Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. So nice to be with you guys tonight. I don't know where I am. It's pouring, raining, and not so nice, the weather, but let's not talk about the weather. I just want to give a shout out to my co-host tonight, retired NYPD Sergeant, Professor at Albertus Magnus, and attorney Mike Geary, who became a grandpapa. His first grandchild was born. He's the grandpa to a little baby girl. He traveled to Denver and he's back in New York again. So if you get a chance, even in the chat, to congratulate Professor Mike, I'm sure it'll be much appreciated. He is a grandpa, and it's a title that I'm sure he takes even more important than his law degree. Anyway, folks, we sort of wanted to dig into this case of Kohberger, and not everyone realizes how big this decision was from Judge Hippler, that he ruled against the defense and allowed all of the evidence to come in that had to do with the DNA evidence. Because after the DNA evidence came in, that led to other evidence. And if he had suppressed the DNA evidence, so much of the evidence that came after that would have been listed, and you hear us say this expression all the time, as the fruits of the poisonous tree, and it would have been suppressed. And the case against Kohberger would have been so weak, I don't know what they would have done. So Judge Hippler, good judge. I mean, he made the right decisions. A lot of the decisions earlier on, let's just recount it. When it was in Moscow, Idaho, Latah County, Judge John Judge seemed like a hell of a nice guy, but didn't seem like a very strong judge. It's almost like he ruled every decision seemed to go with the defense. And the defense, one of the defense's requests was a change of venue. And maybe John Judge said, yeah, let's get this case the hell out of here because I don't want this case anymore. And they sent it to Boise, Idaho, and it landed on the desk of Judge Stephen Hippler, who you see in this thumbnail. And sometimes they say, when you wish for something, you don't know what you're going to get. And they got Judge Hippler. And I'm not saying he's not a fair judge, but he's perhaps a much tougher judge than Judge John would have been. So anyway, folks, hold on to your hats. Hold on to your loved ones. Hold on to your service dog. Hold on to your cup of coffee, your glass of wine. You're about to enter true crime from a police perspective. You're about to enter the off-the-cuff zone, the police off-the-cuff zone. There has to be some common sense.
They were the ones who called 911 to get him help, and now they're calling for change.
And now a word from our sponsor. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion. With the largest selection of odds on everything from NBA and college basketball to the NHL and UFC, BetOnline continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every three-pointer to hat trick, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. We're going to get right into this, guys. So I want to bring in brand new grandpa, professor at Albertus Magnus College, retired NYPD sergeant and attorney. Welcome to the show, Professor Mike Geary. Welcome, Mike.
Bill, good to see you. Good to see you. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for that little intro. It's wonderful to be a grandpa.
Well, welcome back from Denver. I'm sure, even though you love being there to see your new grandchild, the weather in Denver was probably like the North Pole times two,
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah,
It was
no,
pretty damn cold, right?
Beautiful.
So, Mike, let's get into this. And, one of the things that I said earlier on, you see in this thumbnail, the evidence stands, the judge allows the DNA evidence. And there was so many more requests that the defense had made to suppress evidence that had he ruled in their favor, in almost any one of these, it would have really, really have hurt the case for the prosecution. Your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. Without that DNA evidence is key. Doesn't mean that you can't get a conviction without DNA. You'd have to rely on all the other things, which are pretty darn good. However, that DNA is like the foundation upon which a jury could really say, okay, we got this. We know what DNA is. People, this isn't 30 years ago, or maybe people were skeptical, or 40 years ago where they just heard about DNA. Everybody knows how exact it is. And so therefore, this was a huge foundation upon which the whole entire case would be built. And without it, it's an okay case, but not overwhelmingly convincing case. With it, it was so important. So this was, thank goodness, the cops did everything technically right according to the way it was supposed to be done. With the FBI there, the state police helping out the Moscow police, they did it by the book. And this is the reward that you get for doing it by the book, as you've done 100 times in your life, 200 times as a sergeant. This is what you do. This is the reward. Going forward, you've got all the evidence that you gathered, and it was approved. The gathering was approved by the judge, and now you're going to present it to a jury, and that's what you're looking for.
You know, Mike, even Ann Taylor, who is the lead attorney for Brian Kohberger, here she is in a thumbnail. She tried to get so many things suppressed in this case. And it was almost like throwing things at a wall and hoping some of the things would stick.
Yeah.
But this judge was very strict, and not just strict, but knows the law. And he didn't simply allow the DNA because without it, we have no case. He used the law to say, wait, your argument has no case law precedent. And you're arguing that things are a search that are not a search. They're simply a way that certain DNA is processed. For example, the SNPs technique, the single nucleotide polymorphism. That's a tough thing to say, but I got it out there. Anyway, she was arguing that that technique utilized by the labs that were used by the FBI was in itself a search, and the judge totally disagreed with her. Your thoughts?
Bill, yeah, as you've done these things so many times. You have a crime scene, you get a search warrant, you process the crime scene, you get DNA, you get blood evidence, perhaps you get a fingerprint, you get a footprint, you get all of these things. So long as the police got the search warrant as they needed it, everything that they gather that pursuant to that search warrant, they've gathered legally, constitutionally, under the Fourth Amendment, and therefore it should be allowed in as evidence. They got all kinds of search warrants for all the digital evidence, the phone records, his Amazon records, surveillance footage, that sort of thing. The search of his graduate apartment in Washington at the University of Washington, all was done pursuant to a search warrant. And therefore, the police did everything right. The judge recognized that. The big thing she was looking for was to extend the necessity for a search warrant to a testing after the evidence was already gathered pursuant to a search warrant. And as you said many times, they've already got the search warrant. He has no right of privacy or expectation of privacy. No perp has an expectation of privacy or right to privacy in the things that they leave behind in their crime scene. Hitler did exactly what he was supposed to do. He followed the law. She was asking for something that was unheard of, that was new. And when he asked her, can you provide me precedent? Give me a case. She couldn't provide a case. And because there was nothing in Idaho that would ever support what she was saying. The closest she could even find was a minor case in California that was not even really similar, but it's the only thing she had. She went in there with a miracle call, Hail Mary pass, and he shot it down.
The other thing is, Mike, this case will have huge case law implications also. had he ruled that in her favor, this would have become case law for time immemorial. That he turned then said that searching the DNA through a SNP, a single nucleotide polymorphism, now is a search and you need a warrant for it. She would have set new case law precedents with this. And I think the judge was smart enough to know that and ruled the way he ruled. This is from NBC News. I'm going to play this here.
A major setback for Brian Kohberger's defense. Multiple new rulings from the judge set to oversee this quadruple murder trial, knocking down all of the defense team's efforts to get key evidence tossed out.
This is State v. Kohberger.
Cell phone and email records, surveillance footage, even Kohberger's past Amazon purchases, potentially all now fair game for prosecutors. But most significant of all, the judge refusing to toss out DNA evidence linking Kohberger to the crime scene, including DNA investigators found on the button of a knife sheath left near the bodies of two victims, a statistical match to a swab taken from Kohberger's cheek during his arrest in 2022.
Our first point is it was an illegal search.
The judge appearing deeply skeptical of the defense team's arguments to exclude that DNA at a hearing last month.
When there's a DNA match between the DNA and the sheath and Mr. Kohberger, isn't that probable cause every day and twice on Sunday?
Now finding no constitutional violation from investigators initially running the DNA through public ancestry websites to build a list of possible suspects, explaining Kohberger exposed his DNA to the public by leaving it on the sheath, thus forfeiting any reasonable expectation of privacy in the DNA left behind. The judge similarly not persuaded that investigators couldn't sift through the trash outside his parents' home once they zeroed in on him, saying, by throwing away an item of trash containing his DNA, defendant cannot object to the testing of that DNA. These latest rulings a significant boost for prosecutors heading into trial this summer as they seek to try Kohberger for the murders of college students Ethan Chapin, Xana Kernodle, Kaylee Gonsalves, and Madison Mogen. The judge also throwing cold water on the defense team's claim that law enforcement misrepresented the account of a surviving roommate, finding her statements to police remarkably consistent, but if not, then fodder for cross-examination.
And the Gonsalves family releasing a statement after the judge's ruling, saying in part, it's always a double-edged sword waiting. You want the right decisions to be made, but you also want them to be made quickly, adding, in the big picture of life, justice is just moments away.
Perhaps not unexpected, but a big blow to the defense. So where does it go from here?
Yeah, so these were about motions to suppress. That's about how the evidence was obtained. They said it was illegal. The judge didn't agree. They still have an opportunity for more motions ahead of trial. Those are motions in limine. They try to limit the sort of damage that could be done for what would go to the jury. So that's still another opportunity, but this is going to be hard. They cannot appeal these rulings. They have to wait until after a verdict, guys.
Laura, thank you for the update.
Mike, can you imagine that the judge suppressed that DNA and because the argument was that a perpetrator has an expectation of privacy inside a crime scene? How ridiculous is that?
Bill, it's one of those law school arguments that maybe a professor would throw out there to see what the students think about it, and make arguments and get them thinking like attorneys and stuff. That's great. But we're talking about the real world here. And he's got no expectation of privacy in his anything that he leaves behind, like a footprint, fingerprint, blood, hair, all of these things. His image on a surveillance video, he has no right to privacy in that. And also, when it comes to garbage, Nina Chandra in the chat correctly pointed out that's from an old California case from 1988 called Greenwood versus California. Once you go to throw something out at the end of your driveway, you've indicated to the world that you don't care who sees it. And so therefore, when they saw him doing really weird things at like 2:00 in the morning with a hoodie on, covering his face and gloves on and putting stuff out into his neighbor's property, into his neighbor's garbage, that indicates that he's abandoned that. Anything that's in there is fair game for the police. What she was asking for was a total stretch of this idea of a right to privacy. And she had nothing to back up her claim. It was just kind of like a nice argument that did not have a foundation. And Hitler, you could just tell from, we talked about this, you could tell from his body language, especially when he said, isn't that probable cause every day and twice on Sunday? Yeah. He wasn't going to fall for any of that stuff.
No, absolutely. You know, the other thing is, and many people in this case that we listened or we read the chat have said that he didn't do it. He didn't do it. You know, we talk about, you know, first of all, to me, that the touch DNA on the knife sheath is extremely powerful, and there will be people again that argue against that. But now let's look at some circumstantial evidence. All right, the fact that he ordered a K-bar knife from Amazon and they have the order, that to me is like, let's connect all the dots, as I say, which investigation is connect the dots. That, tell me anyone in the chat that doesn't mean anything to you, that Kohberger left behind a knife sheath with his touch DNA on the button, and when they check his Amazon ordering record, he orders a K-bar knife. To me, that is connecting, again, circumstantial, but powerful circumstantial evidence.
Right. That's the beauty of circumstantial evidence, because a lot of times you're not going to have somebody confessing to a crime or actual videotape of them actually committing the crime. So everything is circumstantial. The DNA is circumstantial. The K-bar knife being ordered from Amazon a couple of months earlier, him driving a Hyundai, Elantra, whatever the model was. That's all circumstantial evidence. All you're asking for is a jury to draw an inference, as you said, and they can draw an inference that having purchased a K-bar knife and having his DNA on the knife on a K-bar knife sheath at the crime scene, and there's surveillance video of a Hyundai driving around, very grainy, but it's there, and him having owning a Hyundai. You put it all together, and what does an ordinary, reasonably prudent person think of all these things that connect? And that's all you need to do. That's fantastic. Circumstantial evidence should not be derided by anybody. Circumstantial evidence put together in a proper, like, what do you call it? Consecutive kind
chronological, Mike.
Thank you.
I went to college once too. I remember that word.
Right. Chronological order. That leads them right to a guilty verdict.
You know, Mike, I used to tell my class when I used to teach college, I used to say, circumstantial evidence from which inferences are drawn. And I would give an example. You're a cop, you're walking your beat, and you hear a woman scream. And out of the alleyway comes a male with a pocketbook, booking, like running. Like we used to say, you can tell the difference between running and running. Running meaning running to get away. Does that mean this guy robbed the lady? No, not necessarily, but in the eyes of an experienced police officer, you absolutely have reasonable suspicion to stop this guy, right? Mm-hmm. And from my perspective, stop at gunpoint. I'm stopping him. I'm putting him face down on the ground. And I'll go even one step further. I'm hooking him up. I'm putting cuffs on him for my own safety. And I'm going to get another officer to go in the alley and see if that lady that screamed is there. And then if the lady that screamed is there, and then we find out that the pocketbook that the perp has under his arm, like a NFL running back, that belongs to that woman. Now we just put the circumstantial evidence together into probable cause. But again, for a police officer, that comes almost damn close to probable cause right out of the box.
Sure.
Right? And people would ask me, "Oh, can you go right from look, the three levels of suspicion: mere suspicion, reasonable suspicion, probable cause is the arrest phase." And students would ask me, "Can you go right to probable cause?" I go, "Absolutely. If you're on the street and you see some guy pull out a knife and rob someone right in front of you, you're not at reasonable. You're not at mere suspicion. You're not at reasonable. You're at probable cause. It's arrest time."
That's right.
All of those things, just to give you an example for folks that never did police work, that is, you would also articulate it to the district attorney in drawing up the charges, Mike.
Yeah, it's the good thing about policing, we're not really, and even in law in many areas, it's not a philosophical argument about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. It's just connecting legal ideas that judges have set up in our system of criminal justice to everyday facts. Somebody screaming, a guy running like, he's in the Olympics with his felony flyers on, and he's booking, he's barely even touching the ground. And you've got that, and then somebody screaming, or you hear a couple shots being fired, and somebody's coming running out of a building. Come on, all you need, this isn't philosophy 101. This is cold hard truth. What's going on here? As a reasonably prudent police officer, what would you believe happened before that, when that shot was being fired and the guys come running out, or the scream, and you hear ladies scream or something like that? That's all. It's very basic. Cops live by rules of thumb when they're working out on the street. And as you talked about to your students, those are examples of what a rule of thumb is. You hear that shot, you hear the scream, you see somebody running, you've got absolutely every right to get that person, get them on the ground, use physical force, detain them until you figure out whether or not, in fact, a crime has yet been committed, just to make sure, because, but you have every right to do that. That is mere suspicion, reasonable suspicion, probable cause. And as you say, you can go right from 0 to 100 miles an hour, probable cause.
Right out of the box. Yep. My last week on the police department, I grabbed 2 detectives from the 2-3 detective squad, and I said, let's go out, like anti-crime. And we're wearing suits, but we're in plain clothes. Let's go out. Just cruise around a precinct, just see if we, maybe we'll see something. So we're driving around, and what we hear, a blood-curdling scream. This woman is screaming like you would have this set up for a law class at the police academy, this set of facts. So we go the wrong way on First Avenue because it's north of us. So we go the wrong way, and we see this guy, robber, beating the shit out of this man on the street, trying to rob him. So we did something very smart. We had 3 guys in the car. We dropped off the one detective, and the perp goes flying, running into the side street. And what do we do as 2 experienced cops? We stay in the car. We chase him with the Chevy, not with our feet. We go past the perpetrator by about 50 yards. We just make our ties up. We slowly get out of the car. He runs right to us. He's exhausted. We're as fresh as a daisy, and we're twice his age. We hook him up. Good. And some rookie, they ID him and they show up. Some rookie cop comes. We go, officer, you can have this arrest. He was like, how'd you guys get this arrest? He had never seen a pickup arrest in his short police career for robbery. He was like mesmerized. How'd you guys do it? Well, it was just a little sort of a little dot on top of the eye of my police career. Yeah. My last week, I did what I did for 6.5 years, plain clothes anti-crime, and it was fun. And we didn't process the arrest. We gave it to a rookie cop, and he was so excited. Anyway, just a story that I thought I would tell. Anyway, I want to show some of Ann Taylor's arguments from the actual court presentation.
Media accounts, there's just no connection.
Part of Taylor's argument had to do with the investigative genetic genealogy and the lack of connection between Kohberger and the victims. But Judge Hippler said Taylor's argument didn't meet the bar. Now to Kohberger's request to suppress his arrest at his parents' home in Pennsylvania. Kohberger had argued that police violated his rights when they broke down the door to his parents' home in the early morning hours of November 30th of 2022. At a hearing last month, Detective Payne talked about where they found Kohberger's car during the arrest.
Where was Mr. Kohberger's car parked at the time of his arrest?
It was in the garage.
Was it later seized pursuant to a search warrant from that garage?
Yes, ma'am.
The police planned to arrest Kohberger by knocking and announcing, but switched to a no-knock warrant. Judge Hippler's order denying Kohberger's motion explains why. Hippler wrote, at 12:33 a.m., snipers observed a kitchen light turn on and saw a taller, young white male wearing a black hoodie standing near the glass sliding door leading out to the deck. At 12:40 a.m., the same person was seen again. This time, officers were able to positively identify the person as defendant. At 12:55 a.m., the light turned on in the garage where defendant's vehicle was believed to be parked. At 1:03 a.m., lights flashed in the garage as if the vehicle was being locked or unlocked by a key fob. At 1:09 a.m., defendant was seen in the kitchen of the home, this time wearing rubber gloves and handling a plastic baggie. Based on these observations, law enforcement believed defendant was potentially destroying evidence from the vehicle that was related to the homicides. Law enforcement was also aware that defendant possessed a Glock handgun, prompting a concern over officer safety due to the defendant's heightened mental state of awareness or threat level of police possibly tracking him. These are called exigent circumstances, and that allows law enforcement to arrest someone using a no-knock warrant.
You know, I always I put it in the chat, and the exception to a search warrant that makes it exigent circumstances is something called the 3 E's.
Yep.
And it stands for evidence, endanger, escape. So if the defendant possibly is destroying evidence, if he's going to endanger you or himself or someone else, or he's in danger of escaping, you don't have to knock. Boom, the door. And that is the exception to a search warrant where you have to announce your presence. And that's called the 3 E's. I just thought I would let our audience know that I still remember some of these little acronyms.
Hippler went on to write, the executing officer's new defendant, based on compelling evidence, was believed to have orchestrated an unprovoked and exceptionally brutal quadruple homicide with a knife. They had information he was in possession of a Glock handgun. They knew he was in the residence, awake, potentially aware of law enforcement's presence, and potentially destroying evidence or perhaps retrieving his gun or a weapon from the vehicle. His vehicle was in the garage nearby, thus giving him a means of quick escape. Judge Hippler wrote that Brian Kohberger was taken into custody in a bedroom, and a .22 caliber Glock handgun was found in his bedroom. Kohberger also wanted any statements he made to law enforcement suppressed, arguing they were the fruit of the poisonous tree from the arrest that he claimed violated his rights. His attorneys acknowledged officers had read Kohberger's rights twice.
Were you present when Detective Gilbert Mirandized Mr. Kohberger at the station? Gilbertson, sorry, yes.
Yes, ma'am.
And that took place after Mr. Kohberger was first seized in his home, right?
Correct.
That also took place after he was transported in the back of a police car to the station, right? You noted in your report that Detective Gilbertson had a recorder in his pocket at the time of the interview.
I believe so.
Were there any recordings that took place at the Kohberger home when entry was made into the house?
I do not know.
Judge Hippler wrote that Kohberger told officers that he had that handgun and engaged in small talk with them after his arrest. He said that officers asked them what was going on with his arrest as they drove him to the police barracks. Hippler wrote, the state does not dispute defendant was in custody when first detained. However, there is no evidence before the court that defendant was interrogated at any point from his arrest to the time he was formally interviewed by Detective Payne, at which point he was Mirandized.
Folks, just so you know, also another little rule of thumb, in custody, write that down if you're a criminal justice student, in custody plus interrogation equals Miranda. So if either one of those doesn't exist, you don't have to read Miranda, you know. So person's in custody and you're not interrogating him, you don't have to read a Miranda yet. And people, some district attorneys get really nervous over that. I wasn't asking him any questions, nothing. Why would I read a Miranda right then? In custody, now you're going to interrogate him, you must read Miranda. So as I said, some district attorneys would go, oh, you should read it right. No, this isn't Law and Order. We're not reading it on the scene. That's ridiculous. We're going to wait till he's in a proper interrogation room. He's comfortable, and then we'll read him Miranda.
The sole evidence is that defendant engaged in small talk with officers with the only exception being when he briefly asked about his arrest and was told that investigators were going to speak to him at the station about the situation. Voluntary or spontaneous statements or questions unprompted by interrogation fall outside the scope of Miranda. Next, Hippler's order denying Kohberger's request to suppress the DNA evidence in the case because of the genetic genealogy work used to identify Brian Kohberger as a suspect. A male DNA profile was found on a K-bar knife sheath found next to Maddie Mogen's body. The crime lab named that DNA profile Q1.1. Hippler wrote, the Idaho State Police delivered Q1.1 to Othram on November 22, 2022. Othram developed a SNP profile from Q1.1 and searched Family Tree DNA in GEDmatch Pro. This work revealed 4 brothers of interest, all of whom were low matches to Q1.1. A footnote states these brothers did not share defendant's last name. So that was an interesting bit of information right there. Early in the investigation, Othram came up with 4 brothers determined to be low matches. Then the FBI got involved. And this is where Kohberger argued his rights were violated. Kohberger said the FBI ran the profile through MyHeritage and GEDmatch, 2 databases that do not allow law enforcement to access their databases. Only Family Tree DNA and GEDmatch Pro allow law enforcement access. Kohberger argued that agents accessing MyHeritage and GEDmatch violated a DOJ policy, but Hippler said the policy was simply guidance and didn't place any legal restrictions on law enforcement. Kohberger had also argued that law enforcement needed a warrant for the work.
Your Honor, our position is that the court should suppress the IgG identification and everything that flows from that. This is supported by 4th Amendment of the United States Constitution, due process, Article 1, Section 17 of the Idaho Constitution. Your Honor, there was no warrant for several phases of the search that led to the IgG work, investigative genetic genealogy. And we think every single one of those stages, a warrant was required. None was given. And so this must be suppressed.
Hippler disagreed, writing, the state denies that the testing of the DNA from the sheath was a search, pointing out the DNA was lawfully seized evidence from the scene of the crime. The state further contends defendant has not demonstrated he had a reasonable expectation of privacy in this DNA because he had abandoned it and or because he has not shown the existence of a reasonable privacy interest society is willing to recognize. Judge Hippler said he found no violation of Brian Kohberger's 4th Amendment rights. I want to bring in Philip Dubé.
So very, very interesting. And we were talking about that before. Had Judge Hippler ruled any step of the way, this would have established new case law that would have been sort of new ground. And to say that, processing the DNA through different techniques is a search each time, that would have just blazed ground that simply isn't true. It's not a new search. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, Billy, she's trying to talk about the search through the database like Ancestry.com and things like that. But the real crux of it is, did the police have a search warrant and properly take care of all the evidence at the crime scene? That they did, and she's not disputing that, but she's saying, because there are certain places that allow the police to search databases, fine. But for the places that don't allow the police to search without a search warrant, because there's an agreement in place that amounts to a constitutional violation. It's not a constitutional violation, as Hippler said, that the court is willing to recognize. All it is a dispute over or a contradiction or maybe not following policy. But that possible not following policy doesn't rise to the level of a 4th Amendment constitutional violation of any sort of privacy interest that Kohberger has. And so therefore, no, everything was done and it's done constitutionally, and it's going to come in as evidence at the trial. And that's that. If he had ruled any other way, he would have blown the whole idea of what we understand presently as a privacy right under the 4th Amendment. He would have blown it out of the water, he would have made it unlimited. And that is ridiculous.
Just for folks that it's the first time you've heard of Othram Labs, it's a high-tech lab that processes DNA. It's in Texas, and they've made some of the highest level identifications through, they're referring to it now as IgG, investigative genetic genealogy. And it's the Middlemans, the husband and wife team that run Othram Labs. And they've done some incredible work. And between them and the deaness of investigative genetic genealogy, CC Moore, they envision a day where there will no longer be serial killers because they'll catch them so early on in the investigation, they won't get to be serial, which is an amazing thought. Serial rapists won't exist anymore if this technology and if the law catches up and does the right thing so this technology is available to law enforcement to use so that real bad people are caught early on in their criminal careers. And that is an amazing thought that science is providing this really amazing technology to law enforcement. Mike.
Yeah, Billy, the IgG is an amazing thing because it used to be 30 years ago, you'd need a lot of blood, a few drops of blood. And even though DNA can last a long time if left undisturbed, like on the knife sheath and things like that, back in the day, if you had that knife sheath, that would have had to have Kohberger's fingerprint, perfect, nicely made fingerprint, which would last a while, or his blood, which would last a while too. And so that's what you'd have nowadays, especially after 9/11 and all the advances they can make in terms of identifying the poor people who perished in the 9/11 attacks. All of those advancements in DNA science have led right now to IgG, investigative genetic genealogy, which is fantastic because you could take a little speck, which is nothing more than a couple of skin cells that are barely visible at all, and use that and then make a genetic map of that person. And then you can go to a lab that has someone's other people's DNA on file because they're looking for their ancestors and things like that. And you can make connections. Say this person may be a blood relative, and you could even determine the gender. So that's how the police, when they got the DNA from the garbage, they realized the DNA inside the Kohberger's garbage, some of that DNA came from like a napkin that Kohberger's father. So when they got that match, then they got that and they matched it to Kohberger's DNA on the knife sheath. They said, there's a male relative here. So that was fantastic. And so that was really everything that they needed to make that arrest. So that is how powerful IgG is. It takes that concept of, we think of DNA from say 20 or 30 years ago, and it just turns it into the future. And as you say, there won't be those serial rapists anymore. There won't be those serial killers. They'll be caught much more quickly.
Absolutely. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. If you like real crime, true crime from a police perspective, you're in the right place. And if you're not subscribed, hit the subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up, hit the like button, share us with your friends and your family. And if you want to contribute to us financially, we have a Patreon with 4 different levels, and we also have a YouTube channel membership with 5 different levels. And you could contribute and help this show to be able to stay on the air and to prosper. But we appreciate all of our friends, our Police Off the Cuff family, and our subscribers very, very much. Ethan Chapin's family has stayed away from this case. And for the most part, he's the one. Ethan was a triplet, and he has a brother and a sister, and he was the third. And the family, if you hear the family or have seen the family, you can't help but see how they are a higher level of human being. At least they're higher level than me. I could not forgive and forget and try to move on with my life after something this horrible happened. I would be probably obsessed with it, and I would want to follow this case along the way. But the mom and the father, two very strong people. And I so admire what they're doing, even though I couldn't be like them, but I admire what they're doing. I want to play this. And this is the mom of Ethan Chapin. When she hears about this, the DNA and the decisions that the judge made.
After an Idaho judge denied motions to exclude key evidence in the trial for Brian Kohberger, we're now hearing from the mother of one of the victims.
Yeah, Kohberger is charged in the brutal deaths of 4 University of Idaho students. And this afternoon, Fox 13 Shira Matsuzawa spoke with one of the victims' moms.
Sitting down with Ethan Chapin's mom, Stacy, she says they're blessed to have had 20 years with him. But they're constantly finding a way to move forward.
It's always kind of right at the forefront. So you have to learn to live with that.
Ethan, along with Xana Kronodal, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Gonzalez were stabbed to death in an off-campus home in November of 2022. Just last month, attorneys for Brian Kohberger, the man accused of killing the 4 University of Idaho students, filed motions asking the court to throw out key DNA evidence in this case. This week, Judge Stephen Hippler denied those motions.
How could you not? Let's be honest. How could a judge not allow DNA? I mean, he basically said it in one of his hearings. He said, it's admissible every day and twice on Sundays. I mean, and that's how it would have been, you would have had to have fought tooth and nail if somebody didn't allow the DNA in it. That's crazy.
The ruling bringing the case one step closer to the trial scheduled to begin this summer. A trial the Chapin family has been adamant about not attending in the past.
I just feel this impending storm that's coming. We are, reconsidering, whether or not we'll go. That is a very difficult thing to think about. But, if we have to go, I don't know who else can represent Ethan other than his family.
Until then, Stacy's focus is on Ethan's siblings, who are set to graduate this May. As a triplet, Ethan would have been alongside them. His legacy now helping others get an education. The family started the foundation, which has since awarded $55,000 in scholarships to 35 kids, all in Ethan's name. Shira Matsuzawa, Fox 13 News.
What an amazing family. And I admire that sort of Christian attitude of sort of forgiving and trying to move on with your life. I couldn't do that. I could not. I'm more from the Hammurabi's Code school of thought, And if people don't know what Hammurabi's code is, it's the oldest code in the history of mankind. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. I'm from that school of thought. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, Bill, I think I admire the Gonzalez family, the Mogan family, and, everybody's family there, the Chapin family, because you have to do something constructive to try to get through this. I couldn't imagine. You have children. I have children. I could not imagine losing one of my children, especially in this way. And so they're trying their best and they're succeeding to make, something good come out of this experience. So, God bless them. God bless them.
ATS News, you're so right. Interesting because they were so against going. ATS News, I used to say when I was a cop, and one side of my family are Democratic liberals, and I would say the definition of a conservative is a liberal that just got mugged. And everyone would find that so amusing, but there's a hell of a lot of truth to it. Once you become a victim of a crime, your political perspective changes 360 degrees. Mike.
Yeah, Bill. And when you look at this case now that the judge has made his ruling, all that evidence is going to come in with the prosecution, with all their witnesses. Kohberger's, chances of being acquitted have gone from to really, really super low, like amazingly low. And Mary in the chat was asking about would he, consider, a plea bargain. But at this point, now that the prosecution has won these motions, I think the prosecution won't even, Mary, I don't even think the prosecution would even offer any sort of plea bargain for, say, life behind bars without possibility of parole. I think that the district attorney, it's going to be Bill Thompson. I think he feels really good about the case now, and he's in the driver's seat. He's like, there's no way we're probably going to lose this case at all. I'm not even why offer him something now? We've all of the evidence is going to come in. Let's get this guy. So yeah, I don't think there's going to be even an offer for a plea bargain for Kohberger.
I think there's a lot of people that want to see the state go for the death penalty. This is such a heinous crime. 4 students slaughtered in their beds, so I think it's almost like the state has to go for it. But yet, the nature and the politics behind the death penalty, if Brian Kohberger gets convicted and gets the death penalty, it would take probably 25 to 30 years for it to be carried out. And in that time, who knows? It could be appealed and it could be reversed. You don't know. The death penalty is a very unpopular penalty across this country. Certain places, certain states fulfill it more than others. But many states have reversed it. New York used to have the death penalty, and they don't have it any longer. The federal government still has the death penalty. And obviously, Idaho still has the death penalty, and they intend on going for it if he gets convicted in this case. Mike.
Yeah, even states that do have the death penalty, like say Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Indiana, places like that, the people who they're executing today, say in 2024, 2025, they were convicted of murders back in like the early 2000s, maybe in the late 1990s. In New York, the last person ever to be executed in New York was through the electric chair, and that was a guy named Eddie Lee Mays, and he was executed in 1963. That's how long ago it was. So you're never going to see it return, I don't think, ever in New York. And so some people do, who, or even if you're a booster of the death penalty or an advocate for the death penalty, you're a critic. The fact is, realistically, even if you, like you say, if he's going to get executed, it's going to be a generation from now. He'll be in his 60s. He'll be as old as I am right now. And I will hopefully still be around, and I'll still have my marbles and watching this. And I'll be telling my grandchildren, hey, I remember when that guy was convicted. But it's what makes it very difficult, because it takes so long to implement the death penalty. Even if you're pro death penalty, it gives people pause to consider, should we even bother?
Mike, I just wanted, there's sort of like an elephant in the room, and I see some people in the chat talking about it. Apparently there was 2 unidentified blood samples within the crime scene. One was, I believe, may have been on a banister. I'm not sure exactly, but it's unidentified. The other was on a glove that was found on the property. And right now we're told they're unidentified, DNA samples. Now, if I was the prosecutor and if I was the police in this case, I would try to find out whose blood that is, just to eliminate them.
Sure.
In times, law enforcement does something called elimination fingerprints to eliminate someone that could have been allowed or had permission or authority to be in the location, to eliminate them as a suspect. So that could be the case here, but it's something that a jury hears. There's 2 blood samples that are unidentified. Could they be the killers? That, is an argument that no doubt they will try to use that. Ann Taylor will try to use that. So I think it would be in the best interest of the prosecution, of law enforcement, to try to identify, maybe through investigative genetic genealogy, who this blood belongs to.
You're right, Billy, 100%, because, if I'm Ann Taylor and I know what she's going to do, she's going to pound away on that fact all during the trial when she's cross-examining anyone and everybody who was connected with that crime scene search when they're going through the blood evidence. And she's going to pound it into the jury's consciousness. at the end when she makes her closing statements, and also probably in the very beginning when she makes her opening statements. That's really maybe the one thing she could hope for, to allow one of the jurors to just pin if they're a little queasy about convicting them, to say, look, there's a possible other perp out there, or possible perp out there that, did it all by themselves. And so therefore, I'm not so sure about his guilt. And it would give a juror that's on the fence the ability to say, that's why I'm going to acquit, to see. And probably the most she could get, I think she's not going to get an acquittal. Most she could get is a hung jury. And that would put Kohberger in a better place, perhaps, for an offer for a plea bargain rather than do the whole thing over again. But I think that gives her something to argue over, 100%.
Absolutely. From the chat, I see some people bringing up some things that Design Rhythm, Zana's mom had over 10 arrests for meth over a decade. She's in prison right now. Design Rhythm, I would just submit to you that there's every single person probably in this chat, and myself included, I can't speak for Mike, has someone in their family that is a black sheep, or has a drug or an alcohol problem, that has been to jail, has been to prison. So can we drag Zana Knodl's mother into this because she's in prison for drugs, and saying that she somehow was involved in this or caused this? I think that's unfair. And will Ann Taylor do this? She may do it, but I just don't think you can just, as I said, everyone on this earth has someone in their family that has a drug or alcohol problem, has been arrested. We all have it in our family. So to just bring this up like this is a smoking gun, and that it's going to clear Brian Kohberger because one of the victim's mother's in jail or prison for drugs, I don't think it's fair, Mike.
Yeah, it's not fair whatsoever. Everybody has in their families dealing with alcohol issues or mental health issues or criminal issues. There's always going to be at least one person in a family that's dealing with it. Can't think of a family that I know well that isn't dealing with one of those sorts of things by a member of the family. Yeah, because what you're doing is you're brazen that issue. It could be true. It could be factually. She may be in prison right now, but it has nothing to do with the crime. What you're trying to do is build a logical, circumstantial evidence case that there is the fact that, Zahner may have been targeted because of her mother's drug use or a revenge killing. And there's absolutely nothing whatsoever to conclude that. And so please, that's one of those conspiracy kind of things. And it really doesn't seem to match.
But, Design Rhythm, yes, the government, the district attorney and the police have to take that into consideration.
Sure.
And try to identify the blood. But you know something? I would bet every single person in this chat, if law enforcement went through your house and they put down luminol, they would find blood somewhere in your house. Who does it belong to? I don't know. Do you have workers come into your house? Do you have guests come into your house? Could someone have cut themselves and wiped it on your banister? And it may have disappeared. But with a chemical like luminol, they can pull up the blood. But we didn't have 4 people murdered in our house. But when you consider this, one sample of blood was on a discarded glove in the yard. It may or may not have anything whatsoever to do with this. And I don't know exactly where the other blood sample came from. But if I was law enforcement, I would sure try to identify it, to try, look, there was this great detective in Manhattan Special Victims, and he had a really vicious rape and an attempted murder. And he went into the living room of the house. And actually, just to cut a little ahead of, the guy was featured on America's Most Wanted, and I'll get to that part later. But in the crime scene, there was an ashtray, and there was 5 or 6 cigarettes put out, smoked cigarettes in the ashtray. This detective had every single one of those cigarettes tested for DNA. Smart, right? Elimination. Do you know what he found out? One of the dopey detectives smoked a cigarette and put it out in the ashtray in the crime scene, which is no of all no-nos. But he did it and he eliminated it. So now, yeah, that was a detective, this dope. He's been disciplined, whatever you want to say, right? Anyway, the perp who was identified was featured on America's Most Wanted. And my team, Manhattan North Homicide, we went out and we caught the guy in a bar in Queens. There was such a great thing collaring this guy because he had put word out that he would not be taken alive. He was going to shoot it out with the police.
I love it. I love it.
We went into, we looked in the window of the bar and there he is drinking at the bar. And we took him down at gunpoint, put him right on the floor of the filthy bar, cuffed him, and he went in like a lamb. This real tough guy, you know, that I don't want to get into the case. But anyway, that was the story. And he was featured on America's Most Wanted. And Stephen Peppuccino, that was his name. I remember this a long time ago. And you could look up the case. If you go on the America's Most Wanted website, his name was Stephen Peppuccino. And he was from Flanders, Long Island. But he had spent he was 40-something years old. He had spent over 20 years in state prison. He was a bad guy. Anyway, that was a little story about elimination DNA inside a crime scene. Mike.
Yeah, Bill. Yeah, as you say, it would behoove the prosecution if they could figure out who that DNA belonged to. Perhaps the blood DNA, perhaps the glove was left by one of millions of people walking by that house in the weeks and maybe months before that happened. A glove fell out of their pocket. And so the problem is you may get a kid, they've never been fingerprinted. They've never been photographed. They don't have any sort of criminal record. They've never submitted their DNA, or perhaps nobody has ever submitted any member of their family's DNA to an ancestry.com kind of place. And so that happens. And the one inside, like on a banister, I think somebody in the chat said it was on a banister. That would trouble me as a prosecutor, Bill Thompson. And I'm sure that you do, he wants to dot every I, cross every T, tie up every single loose end he possibly can before he goes into that trial. And that one little thing would drive me crazy if I don't figure that one out. Even though I think I've got a fabulous, pretty much metrically sealed case against Kohberger, I don't want to give the defense one iota, one little speck of hope that they could get an acquittal from, get a hung jury on something. So therefore, yeah, I'm hoping they figured it out by now, and we just don't know because of the gag order. But absolutely, I would consider it crucial, no matter how much evidence I got against him. That one thing would drive me crazy.
Absolutely. I'm going to play this short video here.
In what could be described as a legal Hail Mary, lawyers for Monroe County native Brian Kohberger had asked a judge to suppress a lot of the evidence prosecutors say proves Kohberger is guilty. Kohberger is accused of killing 4 students at the University of Idaho back in 2022. The case captivated the nation and then centered on northeastern Pennsylvania when state police arrested Kohberger for the crimes at his family's home in Chestnut Hill Township. Brett Riegel is a defense attorney from Monroe County. He says this latest blow to Kohberger's defense is not unexpected, but shows his attorneys may be playing the long game.
The way that the legal system is designed, if you don't raise an issue, you've lost it. So you can't come back and say later, oh, I should have said whatever the issue may be. And so they're trying to put everything out there that they can. They've raised every potential suppression issue. And in some instances, it may be that as the law develops, they'll get relief, particularly as it relates to the digital discovery.
Kohberger's digital footprint, a part of the evidence defense attorneys asked to be thrown out. Ultimately, the judge ruled against it, saying Kohberger did not have any reasonable expectation of privacy in what he shared, said, or bought from his phone. Riegel says, though, that legal standard may be challenged one day, as well as the way investigators linked DNA found at the crime scene to Kohberger. Investigators collected discarded DNA from the trash in Monroe County and matched it to DNA one of Kohberger's family members shared with a genealogical website.
always important to remember that the law is usually about a mile behind science and technology. And so they're trying to extrapolate off of the way that we had set precedent before into what is now an available technology that really changes things.
Rigo believes these moves now by the defense are to prepare for an appeal going forward, which is almost guaranteed to happen if Kohberger is convicted, since he faces the death penalty. Kohberger's trial is set to begin in August in Idaho.
So, pretty much listing what happened and reaffirming what happened in this case. And I think it was very positive that the judge ruled in the favor of the prosecution. In any of these cases, as you know, Mike, there's always the prosecution has to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, and the job of the defense is to create doubt. And I'm sure they can create doubt, but whether the jury believes the doubt that they create, or whether the jury believes in the evidence that they have, the circumstantial evidence they have, and what occurred in this crime scene, that remains to be seen. Mike, your final thoughts?
Yeah. Remember, the prosecution's burden is proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, not beyond every single little iota of doubt that you may have, but beyond a reasonable doubt. They may go through the trial, and we may never actually figure out exactly what his motive was, or a few things may be left unanswered. We just don't know from the evidence, or from witnesses, or testimony, or anything like that. But the question is, can a juror, an individual juror, decide that whether there's a little doubt about something, does that outweigh the level of evidence, reasonably outweigh the level of evidence that was presented by the prosecution? In this case, I really think Ann Taylor, she's done a good job. She's well represented. She knows what she's doing. She used to be a district attorney. Now she's a defense attorney. She knows how this game is played. She's going to give him the best defense he could possibly give her. She could give him. She is doing everything ethically she's bound to do. She's zealously advocating for him. And this is going to be an excellent case to watch. And therefore, please, everybody, just keep on top of this case, as we are going to do. And it'll take place this summer. It's going to take several weeks, so it's going to be a marathon case.
100%. Folks, I just want to implore everyone to have respect for each other in the chat. I'm sorry if I missed some things in the chat. We didn't have any monitors tonight. Someone said that we should have had some monitors. I wasn't able to do both tonight like I'm frequently able to do, but tonight was the case, and the monitors were not here. I want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. I think it was a pretty interesting show, and again, I thank everyone for tuning in. This is Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. I'm Bill Cannon. Have a great night, everyone, and God bless.
One episode just ain't enough.